Greetings from our channel again. The Andrews sisters sold 75 million records and were considered icons throughout World War II. However, Patty Andrews betrayed her sisters in 1953 in the most heinous manner imaginable. Instead of simply leaving, she filed a lawsuit against them, took their inheritance, and stopped communicating with them. However, that betrayal was only the start. From scheming marriages to covert overdoses. This is the sinister tale about how the most popular singing trio in America ruined one another. The Andrews sisters were raised in a household where music and hardship coexisted. Peter Andreas, their father, emigrated from Greece to Minneapolis in order to start a new life. After landing a job at an ice cream factory, he went on to create a restaurant. He met Olga Soli, a Norwegian who was brought up in a Lutheran home, there. Initially, her family disapproved of the marriage. However, they gradually changed their minds after Laverne was born in 1911. The family never had an easy life. Peter and Olga lost their second child, Anglin, at the age of 8 months prior to the birth of Maxine in 1916. They were affected by the loss, which influenced the way they brought up their girls. Particularly when it came to music, they gave Laverne, Maxine, and Patty everything. The sisters sang together for hours on end from an early age. The younger two followed Laverne as she played the piano. The Boswell sisters, a jazz trio renowned for their lively rhythms and close harmonies, were a favorite among them. Along the way, they studied their recordings, imitated their idols, and discovered their own voices. They sang for more than just enjoyment. It became their path. Their father's restaurant failed when the Great Depression struck. The family had to deal with a difficult situation. The sisters then made a choice that would alter the course of their life. They performed anywhere they could while traveling with their music. Vaudeville performances, school dances, and silent film theaters. They sung wherever there was a stage. On other evenings, they barely earned enough money to survive. But they continued because of their voices. When vaudeville was dying, the Andrews sisters got their start. Born to Greek-Norwegian parents in Minneapolis, they were raised with an obsession for the 1920s harmony trio known as the Boswell sisters. Olga, their mother, pushed them to pursue music since she recognized their ability. They took first place in a talent competition held at the Orpheum Theater in 1931. That made all the difference. After that triumph, they were thrust into the harsh world of live entertainment by joining Larry Rich's traveling vaudeville show. It wasn't simple to succeed in vaudeville. Later, Patty Andrews stated that performers would stop at nothing to succeed. Some even attempted to undermine one another, but the sisters learned from every setback. They gained knowledge on how to engage an audience and incorporate humor into their performance, as well as how to adjust their harmonies. They became the performers they would be because of those formative years of traveling. They began traveling with RKO's unit shows in the early 1930s, appearing in theaters across the Midwest. By that time, vaudeville was rapidly disappearing as pictures took over. They must have shut down every RKO cinema in the Midwest, Maxine later remarked. A reminder of the sheer number of venues they had played. They continued to advance despite changes in the industry by fusing their distinctive harmonies with swing music. Though they were unaware of it at the time, their big moment was rapidly approaching. Bimur Bis Dushuan, a Yiddish song originally composed for a 1932 musical, was recorded in 1937. The English lyrics were revised by Sammy Cahn and Saul Chaplin. And Decca Records head, Jack Kapp, made the decision to risk the sisters. The song was released shortly after Christmas, and its popularity skyrocketed in a matter of days. It was the most played tune on New York radio by New Year's Eve. The Andrews sisters became the first female group to sell over 1 million copies of their album. However, due to a faulty deal, they only received $50 despite the song's enormous success. Not only was the song popular, it was widely used. Even in Nazi Germany, its catchy tune and swing rhythm kept it popular until authorities learned of its Jewish roots and outlawed it. However, it made the sisters famous in America. Their voices were layered like a swing band's brass section, and their harmonies did more than just blend, they imitated instruments. They stood out and were considered swing-era pioneers because of their distinctive sound. It proved to be one of their best career decisions to sign with Decca in 1937. As a result, they collaborated with the talented arranger Vic Schoen, who helped them define their sound. He encouraged them to try out novel rhythms and intricate harmonies, and the outcomes were remarkable. They sold over 80 million records and recorded over 400 songs during their lifetime. They demonstrated their ability to do more than just swing with songs like Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, and Beer Barrel Polka. They could play calypso, jazz, and even boogie woogie. Their voices were frequently compared by critics to three trumpets playing in perfect unison. Their collaboration with Sean influenced more than simply their recordings. They also had an advantage on live radio thanks to his arrangements. Particularly on programs like Glenn Miller's Chesterfield Show, where they moved fluidly from emotional ballads and lively swing tunes. The Andrews Sisters did more than just sing during World War II. When the world seemed unclear, they provided warriors with a reason to smile. America's wartime sweethearts, Laverne, Maxine, and Patty Andrews, gained notoriety for their music's ability to console soldiers serving far from home. Not all of their songs were hits. They joined the conflict itself, boosting morale and serving as a reminder of the cause they were fighting for. Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, one of their best-known songs, was about a jazz-loving soldier who was drafted into the military. Sitting motionless was impossible due to its contagious pace. Soldiers danced to it at canteens and played it in their barracks. It accompanied them wherever they went. Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, another popular song, encapsulated the desire of war-split spouses. It was more than music. It served as a link to home. The sisters continued to record music. They did something about it. They were members of the USO and entertained troops all around the nation. They spent time with soldiers who needed a break, sang, and danced. From the brutality of combat. In addition to performing, they worked as volunteers at the Hollywood Canteen, where they also provided food, spoke with military, and made sure everyone was comfortable. They had boundless energy. To entice Americans to purchase war bonds in order to help the war effort, they even recorded any bonds today. Hollywood noticed right away. They co-starred with Abbott and Costello in Buck Privates in 1941. The picture was the ideal fusion of patriotism, humor, and music. The sisters' performance of Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy in front of a room full of soldiers while wearing military uniforms was one particularly memorable sight. It was electric energy. The movie made nearly $4 million and made the Andrews Sisters famous across the country. Following this, there were other comedic and musical films that helped viewers forget about the stress of war, such as Private Buckaroo and In the Navy. These films were more than just amusement. They maintained a positive attitude and served as a reminder that happiness could be achieved even under trying circumstances. The Andrews Sisters, however, were actively participating in the war, not merely singing about it. They performed for troops in active conflict zones from 1941 until 1945. They performed occasionally within kilometers from enemy lines during their 1944 tour of Italy and North Africa. They never hesitated, even though the risk was substantial. They were aware of the soldiers' connection to their music. Maxine Andrews never forgot that one moment. As young men were getting ready to sail out to the Pacific, she recalled singing Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree to them on the Seattle docks. Many of them never came back. Hearing the Andrews Sisters was more than just a show for the warriors. It served as a reminder of their family, home, and the life they were defending. Over 16 million troops and women had seen USO shows by the end of the war. In that endeavor, the Andrews Sisters were instrumental. To ensure that no soldier felt forgotten, they sacrificed everything they owned, traveling often and putting their personal comforts aside. The Andrews Sisters were at the pinnacle of the music business by the middle of the 1940s. They became one of the most popular acts in American history thanks to their energetic shows and close harmony singing. They were making $20,000 a week at their height, which, now, would be more than $300,000. They recorded nearly 600 songs, including as Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree, Rum and Coca-Cola, and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, and they sold over 90 million records. 23 of the 47 tracks they made as a result of their partnership with Bing Crosby were Billboard singles. They appeared in 17 Hollywood productions as well. Also appeared on ABC and CBS with their own radio programs. An era was defined by their music. Their songs raised morale on the front lines and at home throughout World War II. They performed for troops all across the world while on tour with the USO. Under false labels, some of their records were even smuggled into Nazi Germany. In an uncertain moment, their voices provided solace. However, things were not as flawless behind the scenes as they appeared. The group's main singer and youngest member, Patty Andrews, was gregarious and intelligent. The middle sister, Maxine, was more somber and pragmatic. Their disagreements frequently resulted in arguments about everything from hairstyles to money matters, not just music. At one point, Maxine claimed that they were as dissimilar as three sisters could be, and that the music was the only thing holding them together. When Maxine secretly wed their boss, Lou Levy, in 1941, tensions increased. For a while, she only told Patty about it. There was a severe divide in the family after the truth was revealed. Everyone was taken aback by Patty's choice 10 years later, in 1951. She departed to seek a profession on her own without alerting her sisters. For 2 years, the Andrews sisters hardly spoke to one another after their separation. The oldest sister, Laverne Andrews, tried her best to keep the group together during it all. She frequently intervened to defuse tense situations because she was cool and collected. She kept them motivated and oversaw a lot of their everyday activities. However, she faced her own challenges. She wed Lou Rogers, a musician. In 1948, yet despite the growing challenges, they persisted in prioritizing the group. During the 1930s and early 1940s, swing music was highly popular. Couples danced to it before bidding farewell, soldiers marched off to war with swing in their ears, and it became the soundtrack of World War II, filling dance halls and playing on every station. Things began to shift. A new sound started to emerge as the bands that had previously dominated the music market battled to stay in business. Money was one of the main causes. Travel was severely restricted by the authorities during the conflict. Rubber was scarce, gasoline was rationed, and touring became challenging. Then, in 1944, dance venues were subject to a 30% tax, making large bands' performances even more difficult. Additionally, a large number of musicians had been drafted, depriving bands of important members. Some did not return. America entered a new era after the war. People desired something new, something that did not bring back memories of years of struggle and tragedy. Once the nation's pulse, swing began to seem like a relic of the past. Singers were emerging as the next big thing at the same time. Vocalists were unaffected by the 1942 to 1944 musicians' strike that prevented instrumentalists from recording new songs. Frank Sinatra and other performers benefited greatly from this. Big band leaders were no longer the focus of attention by the late 1940s. Instead of entire orchestras, audiences were drawn to single vocalists. Additionally, smaller bands became increasingly useful. They suited the newly emerging musical styles and were easier to book and less expensive to handle. Bebop, a quicker and more intricate form of jazz that prioritized solo performers over big ensembles, was becoming more and more well-liked. After that, rhythm and blues began to emerge, laying the groundwork for rock and roll, which was even more significant. Swing had lost its hold on popular music by the early 1950s. The youth wants something different. Rock and roll was energetic and noisy. It lacked the refined, controlled tone of swing, and it had a fresh vitality. Up-and-coming musicians like Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley were taking music in a whole new direction. The entertainment business was likewise altered by television. While swing had flourished in live dance halls, TV had a preference for solo artists and smaller bands. Swing was having trouble keeping up with the pace of the world. The Andrews sisters experienced this change more profoundly than other artists. During the war, Patty, Maxine, and Laverne had sold millions of records and provided soldiers with music to cling to in their terrible moments. They had perfect harmonies. Their energetic concerts, and their songs, such as Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, became anthems during the war. However, their music began to drop off the charts after the war. They experimented with fresh styles in an attempt to stay up. They even recorded a gospel album in 1950, making them the first musicians to do so at Decca Records. However, their greatest hits were over, and their core fan base was evolving. Sparrow in the Treetop, a duet with Bing Crosby, was their final significant hit in 1951. It peaked at number 8 on Billboard's Best Sellers chart and was entertaining and catchy. However, novelty songs like this lost their impact as the music industry changed. The sisters then had a hard time coming up with another great hit. Patty Andrews made a choice in 1953. Something that rocked the music industry. She went it alone after leaving the Andrews sisters. The fact that her sisters, Maxine and Laverne, learned about it from newspaper gossip columns rather than from a sincere conversation just made it worse. The consequences was instantaneous, and the betrayal was profound. The sisters hardly spoke for 2 years. It appeared that the strong tie they had developed over years of performing together was irreparably broken. Patty had flirted with a solo career before, recording songs like, "I Can Dream, Can't I?" and "I Wanna Be Loved." But those songs had still been released under the Andrews Sisters name, with Maxine and Laverne singing backup. Going fully solo was different. It wasn't just a career move, it was a declaration of independence. The timing made things even more painful. Their parents had died just a year apart, Olga in 1948, Peter in 1949, leaving the sisters emotionally raw. On top of that, their longtime arranger, Vic Schoen, had moved on, and behind the scenes, arguments over money and creative control were already straining their relationship. Patty later admitted that the tension had become unbearable. "We had been together nearly all our lives," she said, in a 1971 interview. "We were at each other's throats all the time." Maxine and Laverne tried to continue as a duo, even touring Australia, but it was clear something was missing. The Andrews sisters weren't just a group. They were a unit. And without Patty, it wasn't the same. Their breakup wasn't just another case of a band falling apart. It was a painful example of how ambition, family loyalty, and miscommunication can collide, leaving behind resentment that never fully fades. Patty's decision to go solo wasn't the only thing driving a wedge between the sisters. Her marriage to Walter Weskler in 1952 made things even worse. Weskler had been the group's pianist before becoming Patty's husband. And soon after, he became their manager. His approach to handling the sisters' career was controversial. He pushed for Patty to be paid more than Maxine and Laverne, arguing that she was the star. That financial favoritism created a deep rift. Weskler also fueled Patty's solo ambitions, encouraging her to step away from the group. Maxine openly blamed him for the breakup, and their feud wasn't just private. Lawsuits started flying, adding legal battles to their already fractured relationship. Years later, Patty defended her husband, saying he had always acted in her best interest. But there was no denying that his involvement had permanently changed the family dynamic. Despite the turmoil, Patty and Weskler stayed married for nearly 60 years, right up until his death in 2010. In some ways, he was the one constant in her life. But his legacy in the Andrews sisters' story was far more complicated. His management style and financial decisions made Patty successful on her own, but left behind a family that would never fully heal. As if things weren't already messy, the sisters' relationship took another hit after their parents passed away. Their deaths sparked a legal battle over the estate, and Patty sued Laverne for a bigger share of the inheritance. Maxine was devastated. After everything they had been through, the idea of taking each other to court over money felt like the ultimate betrayal. The timing couldn't have been worse. Both Maxine and Patty were going through divorces. And their careers were already in decline after the breakup. The lawsuit didn't just divide the family. It shattered their public image. To the world, the Andrews sisters had been symbols of harmony, the sweethearts of World War II who kept spirits high with their close harmonies and upbeat songs. Now, fans were reading about bitter disputes and lawsuits. The contrast was heartbreaking. Often played the role of peacemaker, but not even she could stop the damage. The lawsuit became one more reason why the sisters never fully reconciled, even as the years passed. For all their success, selling over 75 million records, their story was becoming one of missed opportunities and unresolved grudges. Then, in 1954, something happened that shook everyone. Maxine was hospitalized after swallowing 18 sleeping pills. The official story was that it was an accident, but many suspected otherwise. The weight of losing her sister to a solo career, the financial disputes, and the crumbling of everything they had built together had taken its toll. Just a year earlier, she had been on tour with Laverne, trying to keep their act alive. Personal demons in a hospital bed. For fans, the news was shocking. Maxine had been part of one of America's most beloved musical acts. To hear that she was struggling behind the scenes was a reminder that fame doesn't shield anyone from heartbreak. In 1956, they decided to reunite. It was a chance to bring back the success they once had, but the music industry had changed. Rock and roll had taken over, and younger artists like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry were dominating the charts. The sisters signed with Capitol Records, where Patty was already a solo artist, and they tried to adapt by adding light rock influences to their music. But audiences wanted the old Andrews sisters sound. Between 1956 and 1959, they recorded a dozen singles and 3 albums, including one with 1920s songs arranged by Billy May. None of them made much of an impact. They still had fans and performed in top venues like Las Vegas and London theaters, but their time as chart toppers was over. On top of that, the old tensions between them never completely went away. The reunion was a struggle, and it was clear that their place in the music world was slipping away. Then in 1966, everything changed. Laverne was diagnosed with liver cancer. She was only 55. As the eldest sister, she had always been the steady force holding them together. She wasn't just a voice in their harmonies. Her deep contralto gave their music richness. But she was also the one who kept Patty and Maxine from falling apart. Laverne kept her illness private for as long as she could. When she could no longer perform, the Andrews sisters came to an end. She passed away on May 8, 1967, at her home in Brentwood, California. Without her, there was no group left to save. They had sold nearly 100 million records and earned 19 gold discs. But their time as a trio was over. Patty and Maxine tried to carry on together, but it wasn't the same. Laverne had been the glue that held them together. And without her, the old tensions between them only got worse. In 1973, they reunited for Over Here, a Broadway show built on World War II nostalgia that featured many of their classic hits. It was a success, but behind the scenes, nothing had changed. After the show ended, both sisters kept performing in their own way. Maxine found success in musical theater, starring in productions like Swingtime Canteen, while Patty made appearances on TV and cruise ships. But despite working together on occasion, like when they received a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame in 1987, their relationship never fully healed. Maxine passed away in 1995 at 79. Patty lived until 2013, reaching 94 as the last surviving Andrews sister. Their time as a group had ended long before, but their music lived on. Songs like Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and Rum and Coca-Cola still echoed from the past, reminding the world of an era they had once defined. Patty Andrews carried a regret she never let go of. She wished she had made peace with her sister, Maxine, before Maxine passed away in 1995. But no matter how much she thought about it, she always came back to the same conclusion. Their differences were too deep to fix. Their feud had lasted for decades, long enough that neither of them knew how to undo the damage. They only saw each other twice in the last 20 years of Maxine's life. The first time was in 1982, when Maxine had a heart attack. The second was in 1987, when they received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Even then, they barely spoke. Their relationship had always been complicated. Patty once said Maxine had been a problem from the day she was born. She refused to explain further, wanting to protect the public image of the Andrews sisters. Maxine saw things differently. She described their relationship as loving, but suffocating. The three sisters had spent nearly every moment together. They lived together, traveled together, performed together. There was no space to breathe, no way to step back. Their problems ran deeper than just personality clashes. After their parents died in the late 1940s, a fight over inheritance drove a wedge between them. A few years later, Patty made a decision that changed everything. In 1951, she went solo without telling her sisters first. Maxine and their eldest sister Laverne felt betrayed. They kept performing as a group on and off, but things were never the same. Then came Over Here, a Broadway show that brought them back together in 1975. It should have been a fresh start, but instead, it was the end. A salary dispute led to another bitter fallout. And this time, there was no coming back from it. When Maxine died in 1995, Patty didn't go to the memorial service. She was heartbroken, but she never believed reconciliation had been possible. She carried that feeling until she passed away in 2013 at the age of 94. Maxine had her own regrets. In her later years, she spoke about the way fame had shaped their relationship. She admitted they loved each other deeply, but struggled to coexist. Their rise to stardom had been fast and overwhelming. With more than 75 million records sold and hits like Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, they became some of the biggest stars of their time. Their music lifted spirits during World War II, but behind the scenes, the pressure was enormous. They performed constantly. They never had time apart. Patty's solo career wasn't the only reason for their fights. Money disputes and management decisions created more tension. Maxine also faced personal struggles. Though she never publicly came out, she had relationships with women at a time when it wasn't widely accepted. Some believe this made her feel even more distant from Patty. Despite everything, Maxine still took pride in what they accomplished. But she never stopped wishing things had ended differently. "I wish I had the ability and the power to bridge the gap between my relationship with my sister," she said. The story of the Andrews sisters is both inspiring and heartbreaking. They rose from a small town in Minnesota to become one of the most successful musical acts in history. They recorded more than 600 songs, had over 100 chart hits, and defined an entire era. But behind the music was a family that never truly found peace. When Laverne passed away in 1967, it marked the beginning of the end. She had been the steady force between Patty and Maxine. Without her, their relationship slowly fell apart. By the time Maxine died, there was nothing left to fix. The years of distance had done too much damage.